Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the live stream. My name's Matt Bailey, and we're live again tonight. Going live with a real guest, with someone in real life. Of course, you all know the Muzz man, Murray Hassan, the world's nerdiest book nerd when it comes to whiskey books especially. This guy knows whiskey literature better than I know the back of my hand, or better than I know the dram in front of me right now, to be honest. There's your glass, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining in tonight, having a chat with us both. It's, of course, live with SMWS, and it's so good to have you on, so good to be live with you. I love going live every single night and having a chat about all things whiskey. And as I mentioned last week before Outturn, I said that I want to get back into doing some lives that are more sort of topic-based rather than bottling-based. And tonight is an example of that. Last night we talked about new make. That was a lot of fun, exploring some of the elements of new make, what new make is, why it's important for you to taste it and explore the DNA. Tonight we're talking about the Malt Whiskey Yearbook 2021. There it is. Evening to Patrick Bruckner. Morning, lads. Yes, Patrick, you're on the other side of the world. You're allowed to say that. James says, welcome, Muzz. Good evening, Matt et al. Thank you so much, James. Good to see you.
Evening, guys.
And Lachlan says, can we start requesting the music openers? Mate, you can request the music openers for this live stream, of course. If you send me a song that's anywhere remotely in copyright, then I'm going to have to deny it. So every request will be denied. That's how it works. Actually, that music you heard at the beginning is from a friend of mine who's a DJ who lives in New Jersey. So lovely guy who has some great music. So I've put a few things in there. Mark Teague, thanks so much. Good to see you. And Jesse Morgan, Slancha all, what's in your glass? I'm on a dry week, so let me live vicariously through you. Send tasting notes. I'm thirsty. Okay,
that was a demand, not really anything else.
We picked out two bottlings to taste tonight. Well, let's go with number one. Hey, and the first one we're starting with is actually a Black Label premium livery release from the festive Outturn. I'm going to hold that up. I'm not very, very close to the camera. It's, of course, 5.72 Scaramango. And I'm going to pull a Durbage on you and say, never pour another man's dram.
Fair enough.
So you go first.
Thank you very much for having me, Matt, and thanks for everyone for joining in.
Yes.
I shouldn't pour from above. Wow, that is generous. Yeah, I think I might
You can split me some if you want.
I think I may have
I'm just going to go for a taster of this. Yeah, easy done.
Yeah, that's better. Don't pour from above, people.
We've all made that.
Or maybe do, depending on how your day's been.
Yeah, exactly. So, Jesse, you can live vicariously through us because we are enjoying 5.72 Scaramango. Cheers. Good to see you. Here we go. Hey, guys, I'd like to know what gap in whiskey books that you'd like to see addressed. Well, someone hasn't written in depth about. Oh, that's a really good question. Let's get to that one. We'll get to that one.
We'll definitely put a pin on that.
Put a pin on that. We're going to actually just explore the Malt Whiskey Yearbook to begin with and have a taste of what's in our glass and enjoy a few things along the way. I, of course, am just going to bring up a photo so you can all see it here and we can have a chat whilst we go here. This is the Malt Whiskey Yearbook here. This is the one we're going to be discussing. This is the one we're holding up, of course. I'm actually giving away 2 copies tonight for really cool questions. So I'm giving away $50 worth of books tonight for anyone who asks some cool questions in the chat and see how we go. Copyright strike, yes. I know that one, James. I know it well. In fact, I used a battles track at the beginning of one of my live streams, just not thinking about copyright. And then I got an infliction or infringement notice from YouTube saying, hey, don't do that again. We've muted the first part of your stream. And they muted even my intro where I started talking. So I was like, you sort of cutscene halfway of me going, buh. And so I can't really get away with that one anymore. Darren Howie, greetings, troops. Thank you so much. And Ingvar Rond rules, says Patrick. Yes, this is, absolutely, of course, the Ingvar Rond book that we're discussing, that he puts together and has put together since
2006. So this is something long running. Ingvar Rond is a Swedish guy based in Britain who has written about whiskey in various journals over time, but has edited this and collated the information in the yearbook for quite a number of years now, 15, 16 years. So Ingvar Rond is he rules, yes, absolutely. And the yearbook, without jumping too far,
No, you go into it.
It comes out every year around about October, November, and it is an almanac or account of the year past in production terms. You've got an alphabetical list of all of the distilleries in Scotland. Obviously, the focus is Scotland, and it's malt distilleries, not bourbon distilleries or anything like that. And it alphabetically goes through all the distilleries in Scotland, talks about what has changed in the distillery, a brief history piece on each distillery, who owned it, who started it, who bought it, where it's been sold, recent developments, bottling, some brief tasting notes on that, and that's the core part of the yearbook. So that forms the bulk of it, and each distillery gets usually a page or two for some. But we've got for example here Scarpa and Speyburn, and that's a typical sort of picture of it. A bit of a timeline of the history in a brief form. Whether there's a visitor centre, the capacity of the stills, how big this distillery is, its address, the website, and so on. A brief sort of rundown and some of the core range bottlings that might come from that distillery. And importantly, for a lot of these distilleries, given that most of the industry is still blended whiskey, it goes into it talks about where it's publicly acknowledged or where they can reveal it, which blends it's gone into. So that's certainly something that is quite interesting, and that forms the bulk of the book, and it's updated every year.
And I mean, I'm going to be completely honest with you. There's something I carry. There's a few things I always carry in my ambassador's bag when going to hosting events and hosting tastings. One of those things is this book. Is that whatever the current edition of this book is, even if it's not the most current edition, I carried the 2021 a little bit longer than I did have this one so far. And this is just sort of like, 2019 edition carried well into this year. But this is sort of like, this is an example of a book that I carry with me because it's the kind of stats and kind of information that even if you're not an ambassador, it's just good to know. Andrew said it's the next best thing to being there.
Next best thing to actually visiting the distilleries.
Yeah, and it really is. And the bulk of the book, the blue section right in the middle of the book, is all these distilleries that you wouldn't even actually think about sometimes. Like you don't even actually. Yes, you can look up the superstars. You can look up the Glenlivets and the Springbanks of the world, but how much do you actually know about Speyside Distillery? I know I don't know a whole lot. It's it's not a distillery I know much about. And doesn't have much of a profile either. So it's kind of cool to learn about these distilleries that are often great for consistency, are great for backbone of blends.
The quiet achievers, as I like to call them.
Quiet achievers. A question for Muzz. Does he have all 16 volumes of the Malt Whisky Yearbook from 2006 onwards?
Yes, I do. I am that tragic. Yeah, I've got all of them. I bought, and I was just telling Matt before we started, I've bought all of them except there was a missing one. 2007 seemed to be very hot property. I suspect it's because it had some really interesting articles that no one at that time and in the immediate years afterwards had published on Japanese whiskey, and some insights into some of the developments going on at that time, some interesting things. I also think it was a smaller print run. I'm not absolutely certain of that, but I had to buy that one secondhand, and the other ones I've bought all new. So it's one I've collected all of them, and I go back to the old ones and read the profiles and see what's changed and what's evolved. I find it really interesting. I find the profiles and how those tasting notes have changed, what has happened to the distilleries over time. Obviously, because it's a one-pager on each distillery, a comprehensive history is not there, but they sometimes have to leave out bits. I can form a comprehensive 1 or 2 page sort of history, if you will, on each distillery that's around, which I find really quite interesting as a way of seeing portrayals of the whiskey industry throughout the years. It's a smaller scale, of course, than some of the older books of history that I've referred to in my article in Outturn, for a shameless plug.
Shameless plug.
Shameless plug.
We need a copy right here. Here we go. Outturn. It is Outturn last week. A lot of the bottlings have vanished. This one hasn't, however. This one we're enjoying right now, 5.72 Scaramango. I held it up before. I'll show you again. There it is. It's a 29-year-old Lowland whiskey. in the spicy and dry profile. It's in Outturn. You can find it on page. You can find it on page 20 and 21. There it is. I'll show. That might even be easy to see. There you go. Scaramanga special release, a 29-year-old lowland single
for a
malt.
29-year-old. That's got a lot of life. In no way does it taste like a grand old whiskey or anything like that. It tastes quite youthful, and
that's exciting for me in a way. That's exciting testing a whiskey because we were just discussing old whiskey just before we went live about how old whiskey often has like there's often trademarks of an old whiskey, and if this tasted like an old whiskey, like had those really old hallmarks of an old whiskey, it would be an old and dignified. Yeah. It wouldn't be in spicy and dry. It's in spicy and dry. And I think it's really aptly in spicy and dry. Have you tasted that yet?
Yeah, I've just tasted it. And it's got that dryness definitely wafting right through the palate. It's square in, smack in spicy and dry territory.
That palate is unbelievable. It's like Arnott's milk arrowroot biscuit.
Oh, damn, you stole my note.
But
That's an awesome note.
It's like almost like those Dutch spiced cookies.
Yeah. Speculas.
Yeah. Okay.
I was asked that at a
plus
trivia
one.
thing
Plus on the Muzz on that one.
It was a trivia question I got right once.
Darren Howie says, we won a copy for a photo earlier this year, and it's a gold mine of info. Yeah. Thanks, Matt. You can even read the text.
Without reading a magnifying glass, without needing a magnifying glass.
Yeah, I mean, I think I need a magnifying glass to read the comments this far away. Sometimes wide angle lens like this, I can't see all the comments, but I'm going to fix that setup. I promise. Eventually.
Bigger screens.
I only know about the Scottish distilleries that have SMWS releases, so therefore not Speyside Distillery. We do have a code for Speyside.
We do. I can't remember
the code either. If someone wants to type the code in the comment section, I'd love to hear it. I don't remember. I don't remember all the codes that we don't see that often. Yeah. I mean, even when we got earlier, the Malt of the Month, Maple Syrup Mountain Spring, 80.14. A part of me goes, yeah, Distillery 80 is I know, and I can't remember. Yeah. And you don't need to, but that's the fun about it. Like, I'll be honest with you, I don't actually know the grain codes off the top of my head.
Oh no, that's another level.
I mean, I know the top and the bottom. I can go North British and I can go the top and Ros do, but everything in between that is sort of like G2 to G14 is like what?
I know that there are grain distilleries, but I don't remember them all.
Your Strathclydes and your Port Dundases and Girvins and all those. It's like there's somewhere in that list. They're somewhere. But again, the longer you can not know the distilleries, the better. The better. Honestly, it is because, we've got one partner bar actually. A couple of the guys over at Shirt Bar in Sydney are making an effort not to learn the codes. And a part of me first went, well, pull your head in. I'd love for you to know the codes. I mean, this is kind of what it's all about. And then a part of me goes, actually, not knowing the codes means you can focus on flavor and distillery profile instead of, flavor profile rather than distillery profile, if that makes sense.
And it does. We all want to, reveal, we all want to look behind and solve the puzzle. We're all, a lot of us in this world of whiskey enjoyment do like, knowing the next thing. But
and
there's a pleasure in not knowing too.
What did Andrew once say? He once had that phrase, box tickers.
Yeah.
And look, I know he has a way with words. I'm just saying it's like, people who always have to try the next thing and want to know what that is. I love that. But at the same time, it's sometimes good to look back and go, I just enjoy this kind of whiskey for this kind of whiskey.
And it's just, that's just an enjoyment factor. Sort of briefly returning back to the book, it is mentioned in a couple of the other things. There is one other brilliant aspect to this, a couple of things, but next thing I sort of wanted to briefly touch on was, yes, you've got distillery profiles, but in every one of these editions every year is a woven from the beginning, a series of articles or essays, and then various other profiles written, sort of woven in between every sort of 20 or so distillery profiles, articles on aspects of whiskey and interviews with people and notable questions and things. And one of those that I found really worthwhile is they don't make them like they used to.
I was literally about to reference that article. That's written by Neil Ridley, who did the 3D whiskey and also did the Spirit Wanderer series.
That's right, yeah.
And he's been involved in a few projects. He's a freelancer in the whiskey industry, a bit like Angus McRail or a few other people over there. And so I really do admire his his input. He's a whiskey writer and consultant and used to be an independent bottler.
Yeah. What I really enjoy about these essays, and that one in particular, is it talks about aspects of whiskey we enjoy. And we've read numerous articles in various magazines and on blog posts, and these articles and essays do complement those same sort of things. They talk about things like malting. Charles McLean in this particular edition has a whole article on explaining the malting process. You can go to a book on that, and I've got a number of books that will talk about malting at various levels, everything from the very basic sort of 1 or 2 page summary of it through to technical manuals on malting. And yes, I've gone down the scientific route, and I've got
some of the books you've talked about and recommended in the past. In fact, if you read Murray's article, in this month outturn, he does say, I've got to have to find your article. Oh,
it's the big bookshelf one.
Yeah. No kidding. There it is. You do say, and for the serious whiskey nerds, in the second last paragraph, there have just been 2 released: the Science and Commerce of Whiskey. Look, if you're reading a book called Science and Commerce of Whiskey, you've gone deep.
Yeah, it's deep territory.
Yeah, and that's great if you have.
Yeah.
I don't even have sometimes the temperament for those kind of books. I'll be honest. I love my whiskey books. I love researching all this kind of stuff, but sometimes you're,
there's a level you get to, and
sort of chapter 14 on the commerce of whiskey, and you go, "Oh my God, what have I done?"
Yeah, it's a textbook. Let's be honest, it's a textbook, and that's fine, and it works fine for the audience that it's intended for. What I like about the articles like this and blog posts, but particularly in this context, these ones here, there's enough detail to give you a rundown of how maltings work. In the case of the Charles McLean one, and yet it's not too heavy on the detail. It's not going all the way. I didn't realize, for example, he mentions in the article that the Saladin malting boxes were retired 2 years ago. The last one was closed off and had stopped being used. So
surely it's just a gimmick Saladin box at this point. I mean, what was it? What distillery was it being used at?
God, now I can't remember. It was in the article, and
look, whilst he's looking around. Mark asks, so there's no grain distilleries in the Ebook? No, there's no. It's not a focus on grain. It's a focus on malt whiskey, and it explores malt whiskey predominantly from Scotland. But we'll talk a little bit more about the other sections in a moment.
Yeah, it was Tamdhu Distillery.
Tamdhu. That's a shame. What's your favorite story or article that has stood out of your malt whiskey yearbook collection? Out of all of them.
Out of all of them.
Great question from Keenan Sala. They're good to see you, Keenan. Hope you're well, mate.
The article that was written a few years ago on the Australian whiskey scene by Chris Middleton.
Yes. What year was that written in?
Oh, that was about 09 or 10 or 11.
Okay.
It was in the middle range of them.
I'd love to reread that.
Yeah.
I'd love to read it. I think I started around in 2011 with my collection of them. So if it predates that, then I might not have it, but I'd love to read that, because just take a second to think. I mean, it's a very young whiskey industry in Australia.
Yeah.
So to think about what it looked like 10 years ago 10 years ago today, is versus what it looked at today is a very different proposition. So I'd love to have a look at that. There's been some great comments coming through from Jesse Morgan, where he's been asking about pairing, and he's been saying, what would be the perfect pairing of a book and a dram for someone new to whiskey? Mine would be Whiskey, Wit and Wisdom by Gavin D. Smith. Yes. And Jameson Caskmates Stout. Okay, so, and then
that's an interesting one.
He's all gone on to say that alternatively, I think the 80.14 maple syrup Mountain Spring may be a good replacement for the Jameson. But for a newbie, it may just buy them.
May just bury them like Winnie the Pooh in a beehive.
Okay, Jesse, I've said this before. The society is not just the final step of your whiskey journey. You can be new to whiskey and enjoy a whiskey like 80.14, a maple syrup Mountain Spring, because it's just higher proof. And once you introduce that factor and add water, why is it an advanced whiskey? I never subscribe to that theory. I never do.
It's a hard one. Book and whiskey matching is much like music and whiskey matching. It's a fraught situation, because they are subjective experiences very much of your own enjoyment. And I have read everything from novels and crime fiction through to, and I have, full disclosure, I've worked in bookshops as well. So in past, so it's I've ended up reading all sorts of different things with a dram in hand, and I haven't consciously thought of the pairing. I've just found whatever might work. Sometimes I've gone for a crime fiction, and I've gone for something quite heavy in flavour and strong on that sort of an Isla or a heavy peat influenced whiskey. That they have tended to be my things when I'm reading, crime or heavy drama or anything like that, or thrillers. A Jack Reacher and an Isla actually goes quite well, but it's such a difficult one to match and pair with
because it's so subjective.
It really
there's so many things that you could say. Well, music and whiskey pairings are the great example. It's like do you pair up heavily peated whiskey with death metal? I mean, or do you pair up light and delicate with death metal? There's I think it's one of those things where it could get quite stereotypical without being useful after a little while. So I don't know. And Jesse asks a great one here. How important is it to revisit distillery profiles? Is it something that should be done on a yearly basis? How can us whiskey drinkers do this more effectively? That's a very good question as well.
It's a tangler.
You know what? I'm preempting it now, Jesse. One of these is yours. You've won this. I'm going to send you a copy of Malt Whiskey Ebook 2021. Congratulations! You've asked some ripper questions tonight. Thank you so much. Lots of great questions coming in, of course.
Yeah. Thank you very much, everyone. In terms of revisiting distillery profiles, it's a hard one. As often as you feel like, really. Things will change on a yearly basis, but I guess only if you find it relevant or important. In the wider scheme of things, for most drinkers and most whiskey fans, people who enjoy it, you don't need to know the year-to-year changes that go on. It might be of interest, and by all means, if you find that interesting, go down that road. But it's not necessarily for everyone to need to know by any stretch. It's something that if you find, I like this distillery. What are they up to these days? And what, why am I not seeing this going on? And sometimes the yearbook will have that info. Sometimes it might be a local supply issue, and in which case this only comes out a year. So there are limitations given that it is a yearly publication, micro changes in terms of distribution changes, or, if say someone wasn't available in your regular local bottle shop, it might be something local to an Australia or a local supplier issue. That's certainly gone on in the last little while with delays going on for logistics worldwide.
Yeah. Going back to that article, I just want to jump back a second.
Absolutely.
We sort of started on it and didn't get a chance to really dig into it. There's an article in this copy called "They Don't Make Them Like They Used to." Or do they? So it's a great discussion about whether whiskey's better now or then.
Yeah.
Rose-tinted glasses. I think I did a very short stream on it once about how looking backwards at whiskeys you may have missed out on will only ever lead to disappointment and empty wallets. And how, yes, whiskey often rises in price over a period of time. That's inevitable with anything collectible and tasty. So a whiskey, an article like this sort of emphasizes about how was whiskey actually better back in the day?
That's just it. Do we really know? Or is it rose-tinted glasses? And it's a powerful effect. It goes without saying too many things, but certainly in the frame of whiskey, old whiskies are a snapshot in time. They are, they were created for a particular purpose, for a particular market. And they were, different brands were aiming at different sectors and different markets, particularly the bottles that, we now consider rare and old, which we're talking about things from likely, I guess, the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, excuse me, that were made for particular markets. They did market segmentation. So, Glen Grant, for example, is enormous in Italy. Glen Grant's biggest export market is Italy, and that comes about because there was someone post-World War II, who was very successful in selling Scotch whisky from Glen Grant to Italian bars and restaurants.
And you reckon that's changed the palette of how Italians actually approach whiskey?
Totally,
now?
undoubtedly.
Yeah, that's amazing. Isn't it amazing? Isn't it amazing? Like, because that moment in history has changed how
a whole country of whiskey consumers
in 2020 still approach their spirit.
Still to this day, Glen Grant is the biggest selling whiskey in Italy.
Yeah, blend
or single malt.
Yeah, and
it actually trumps blends.
Yeah, it does, and it's mostly thanks to, I think they call it. Over there they have one which is the equivalent of the Major's Reserve. It's a young ex-bourbon cask whiskey that is very much to the preference of the Italian palate, and I think that's fantastic. But I mean, like going back, you see, on this point, there's Brendan McCarran, and who's referred to as Brendan McFly McCarran in the article. We had him on the live stream actually about 2 or 3 months ago.
Yeah, it was a couple of months ago,
and that was great fun. He's such a trooper. He's got a wealth of knowledge. So Brendan McCarran, for those wondering at home, he's the he's
now being groomed as Dr. Bill Lumsden's successor in Glenmorangie and Ardbeg.
I was looking for the word. Yeah, he's been groomed as, or being prepared for
that role, because they do have to have succession plans. Not that Dr. Bill's going anywhere at this stage, but he does want to plan
eventually
for the future,
retire.
Eventually retire and do other things. But Brendan's official title, I think, is Master Distiller or Head Distiller of Glenmorangie Ardbeg. Bill is head of whiskey creation and stocks, I think. But Brendan McCarran has been working in the industry, and as your interview with him was, it was really interesting and insightful. He talks about the old and new in this article, and it's always good to look forward to the new things that go on, but always remind yourself of what has come before and what is it people have enjoyed about whiskey in the past. You can draw on the past without having to spend too much time looking in the rearview mirror and dwelling on it was much better back then. I really find the article in that sense quite interesting and insightful as an explanation of why we should take off those rose-tinted glasses.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, even just tasting whiskey from yesteryear is important.
Totally.
To see where we've come from and where we're going. But yeah, I think always looking back though, rather than looking forward, is the biggest mistake you can make in whiskey production.
Yeah.
In saying, how can we improve the barley? How can we improve the yeast strain? How can we improve on our cask and our wooden policy? It's far more important than, it was better 10 years ago.
It was fantastic before, but oh no, they've just fallen off the perch, or it's not as good now.
And that old chestnut, they changed their label so the whiskey's changed. Anyway, there's some great comments and questions coming through. I'm going to jump in some of them here. On the Silent Achievers mention, have you discovered bottlings from distilleries you had never considered until reading the yearbook?
Yes, as a matter of fact.
Thank you, Lachlan. Great question.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great one. I had not really tried much of Fetacan, and I had to go and hunt one down. But Fetacan is a distillery, and I was going to find it here.
You've forgotten your alphabet.
Yeah, I forgot my alphabet.
Here we go.
E-F, yes. You don't see too many bottlings of Fetacan in Australia. I don't think it's got distribution here, so I had to go and hunt one down. But I found that one a really different whiskey, and I was drawn to it not because I really wanted. I thought, okay, I need to tick a box or anything, but it was like, okay, well, this has got some honey flavors and a combination of flavors in the core range tasting note that I don't think I'd ever really tried before, and I thought, okay, well, let's see if I can hunt that down. And there is a bit of the thrill of the chase and enjoying the hunting for it. Yeah. There's that. Yeah. We can't deny that that's part of the satisfaction.
That is part of the satisfaction, of course. Yeah.
But I didn't really read about Fetacan before this.
There's all our yearbooks, by the way, just to show us.
There we go. Yeah,
well, almost all of them. That's all of them. Yeah, almost all of them. Yeah.
Someone's gone back to 07, 08. So
yeah, they are rather cool actually. As something else Andrew pointed out on Whiskey and Wisdom about how whiskey books can go in and out of fashion very quickly.
Yes.
Like if you start writing about a distillery like Glenmorangie, and it's like in 2018, if you write a book in 2017 about them, that's great. In 2018, they expanded the distillery a little bit. It's like now your book's out of date.
Yeah.
So it's like, whereas this book being updated every year, Ingvar does a great job of actually. By the way, we have no affiliation at the society at all with this book, which is one that we both have used for a decade or so in learning about whiskey. And there's no affiliation with the SMWS. There's nothing like that. It's just like really good literature that we want to share, and it's always good to have the Murray back on. The Murray, the Muzz man. For those who just tuned in a little bit late, we are talking tonight with Murray, the world's biggest whiskey book nerd.
Oh, now he's talking me up.
Yeah, the world's biggest. Well, at the very least, Australia's biggest whiskey book nerd.
I'd be up there, I guess. Yeah.
I mean, yeah. You'd at least be
it's
like
a niche field.
Maybe 13th in Australia or something, right? No, you'd easily be the most well-read whiskey book reader in Australia. I think that's rather cool. I'm going to grab some more questions as we go along here. Now, great question from Mark Teague I saw come in here. Is whiskey by Anais MacDonald in 1930 possibly the oldest dedicated whiskey text, or is Muzz aware of something older?
There is, in terms of a dedicated book talking about the process of whiskey, it's one of the earliest around, but it's not the oldest. If we were to look at probably the oldest landmark one, the Whiskey Distilleries of the United Kingdom by Alfred Barnard.
Ah, yes.
Which is, I think, about 1886 or thereabouts, is probably the oldest book that was focused, dedicated on whiskey distilleries. And I've mentioned that, I think, before with Matt in a live stream. We did a Zoom call some months ago talking about that. It's a great review. In summary, Barnard was a journalist who was sent by a magazine, a journal, an industry journal, to tour all the available distilleries in Scotland at the time. And he did essentially a distillery history summary on each one. It's a comprehensive tome. I've got a copy of it. It's a hardcover. It's probably about 400 odd pages. He was the original whiskey travel writer. Yeah. That's probably the oldest book I think most people would reference. There are some technical things, and I think some particular things on distillation and the process around whiskey in the earlier 1800s as they started to industrialize the process and document it in a more formal fashion. But there have been older writings on it going all the way back. The oldest that anyone's aware of, I think, in Scotland is the writings in the ledger to Friar John Core about being granted 12 bowls or 12 barrels, bushels of malt barley to make whiskey at Lindores Abbey, I think was.
Yeah.
That's 12, 15, or forgive me, 14 something. I think it's 1400 and something.
Just a casual plug, there's a great article about Lindores Abbey that's our state manager in Queensland, Scott Mansfield, wrote, because he actually has a family connection to the distillery, which is rather cool that one of our state managers is so entrenched in the world of whiskey that he has family that dates back into Lindores Abbey, which is now a new distillery that's popped up there, and intending to follow in the process of making great
whiskey. And I've been following that whole development for quite a while. It's really interesting to see how that'll unfold.
Jason Robson said, please don't forget my question. We haven't forgotten Jason, so I'm going to pop it up on screen now. He says, hey guys, I'd love to know what gap in whiskey books that you'd like to see addressed. What hasn't someone written about in depth before, essentially?
Grain whiskey, if I'm honest.
Yeah, right.
I have not seen anything.
Maybe we need a grain whiskey yearbook.
There's niche.
Let's be honest, it'd be half the width of this book.
Yeah,
but it doesn't matter. I think that's a really good point. I don't know if I've got anything better than that. I'd say. There's even actually lots written about local distilleries. There's been lots written about Japanese distilleries, Scotch whiskey, Irish whiskey. There's lots of good literature out there about those, about regionality, and about different countries making whiskey. But I think as category goes, you're right. I think grain whiskey as a category and as an understanding, even making things like the discussion around column stills and continuous distillation a bit more, I won't say glamorous, but a bit more accessible.
Yeah, making it accessible. I have read those extreme nerdy end textbooks, and they're chemical engineering texts, really, at the heart of it. They do talk about the process of grain whiskey production and how it's all done. The Science of Commerce of Whiskey has a whole chapter on grain whiskey. I think in the new edition they do too. But yeah, it's not accessible. It's pretty much an industrial chemistry or chemical engineering approach. So it'd be nice to see something like that. I don't think anyone, I think it's probably so niche that no one's likely to publish something on that. I may be proven wrong, and I look forward to reading whatever does come out. I'll find it and I'll track it down. So,
Jason, I really appreciate that question. That's bloody awesome. In fact, that's very awesome. So I'm going to send you the other copy I've got to give away tonight. I've got 2 copies to give away. One of each. Here we go. So I'm going to give that to you, Jason. That's an awesome question. So, and really
Jason,
appreciate it. Yeah,
thank you for that.
That's an awesome question. What hasn't been addressed in good whiskey literature? I'm going to get to some of these big ones in just a minute, but I want to do a big shout out to Joey, who says that every outturn is a book on great whiskey. Hell yeah! Yes. You know what? I really appreciate you saying that, Joey.
They put a lot of effort into this, and props to Matt. Compliments to Matt, Susie, Danelle,
the whole team. This is just like the amount of effort that goes into writing all these great articles about the experience of what the whiskey club is about, what the society is all about, is what we do it for. We do it for you. We do it for our members who get to discover and learn more about whiskey and take the journey. So I really appreciate that comment, Joey. That's fantastic. Lachlan says, I mean, the Graham whiskey at the .1's event was phenomenal. Well, that was G13.1. That was brilliant. The unbelievable Graham whiskey, that one.
God, that was good.
Yeah, I wish exactly. See, Lachlan, I'd be keen to learn more about that kind of distillery as well. As I explained at that tasting, it is not like that. You can't get even close to the distillery to take photographs, let alone ask many questions about it.
And that at the heart of it, they're not wanting tourism in those grain distilleries. You'd see photos; they're not glamorous,
but they also don't expect it.
Yeah,
it's like this is an industrial estate that makes spirit. This is not Strathisla. I made that joke on the night. Anyway, that still holds today. I can still use that one.
It'll hold as long as everyone can not recognize what Strathisla looks like.
And Mark reckons a book with pictures of every SMWS bottle ever released would be cool. Oh. I think we need our resident society historian Alex Morse to look into that one. Yeah. I'll put him on the case.
That sounds like a job for Alex.
Yeah, Alex, I got a free gig idea for you. How does that sound? Julian says, I love whiskey because of the stories told or the shared. Does the Ebook have any such stories or interesting myths, etc., from people in the industry, or is it mainly distillery?
Look, I reading that does. You're absolutely right. There are some stories, and one of the really interesting things of the 2021 yearbook, this current edition, is Ingvar says in his introduction he got to interview 7 whiskey legends, he calls them, and they are, some of those are notable names, people like Jim McEwen. But he's gone through Jim McEwen, Michael Urquhart, who worked at Gordon and MacPhail, a family-owned company, Alan Winchester, Frank McCarty, and then some of the lesser known.
There are some chats with these people. It's not so much. I wouldn't say there's too much in the way of myths, but there's some cool stories in there, and I think that's the reason I love whiskey. It's the storytelling. It's the great stories that envelope the industry and bring people together. So awesome comment, Julian. And over and out from Gothenburg. Okay. And
nice to see you, Patrick. Thanks.
And Lachlan asks, what were your picks from Outturn?
Oh, I didn't get a chance to buy anything from Outturn. My Friday, when all of this was released, became a very ugly work day, and I didn't get a chance to look at it. So
that does happen. You can say 5.72 because you're enjoying it now.
I am enjoying 5.72, and I may actually end up buying a bottle of that. That might be my Christmas indulgence, but it is extraordinary. I think everything that gets put on the Outturn, Matt does a really good job with the team in Scotland to try and time up the releases so that we get what is essentially the Christmas hamper deluxe edition of things. So I don't think there's anything that's ever bad out of it. I think all of it's good, and picking what my favorites whenever I get a chance to try them. Whenever I've bought a bottle, I think last year I bought 2 bottles on spec. Just I like the notes. I can't recall what the details were, I'm afraid, but
I have a sneaking suspicion. I know your palate fairly well by now. I mean, I know I've seen what you
he sees my buying.
Yeah, I see them, and I know what you like. And you know what, you shared a bit of that 37 dot something.
Oh yeah.
last year with me, which was
that was
something rather
something
special
special. Yeah, it was a 26-year-old refill cask, 37.
37. Yeah.
37, yeah.
Great
That
stuff.
was lovely.
Great stuff. That was yeah, plenty left. Muzz, says James Caden. There's some good stuff left. You don't need to remind him. He knows Outturn very well. And
I've read it a few times.
Yeah,
now.
he's read it a few times. Changing on you? Now,
Scaramango is brilliant. I had to finish that because that was just too drinkable.
Now, there's two sections to the malt whiskey yearbook that I want to touch on.
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, is the we're going to go to page 174.
Turn to page 174.
And while they're smaller profiles, this is where the list of new distilleries are.
Yeah.
So who here has heard of Aberagi Distillery?
I've never heard of it.
And go. No one has.
Yeah.
Now, the reason is because these are new distilleries that are just in production at the moment, don't have a core range, don't have any notable product on market, don't have anything to speak of yet. Does that sound familiar to when the society started to you in some ways?
Yeah.
About they didn't have core ranges yet, they didn't have anything going on yet. I reckon we're heading into another era of that in some ways. I know that's a whole nother discussion.
That's a whole discussion,
but
I tend to agree with Matt. There's so much going on in the industry now. There's this eruption of new distilleries, all opening up at various scales. And this section on new distilleries gives you the scale. Some of them are not small. Like, the Borders Distillery, which I didn't know anything about, is 1.6 million litres of pure alcohol production. That's bigger than some of the more established ones. That's
very big.
It's bigger than Glen Scotia.
And you also a fun little game to play is sometimes going to old malt whiskey yearbooks and seeing the new distilleries in those and being like, are they still a thing?
Yeah.
They don't all make it. And that's just a reality of running a business, of running a distillery. Not everything gets off the ground. They may have produced for a year. They may have never actually got to production stage yet. That's a harsh reality of being a distillery owner.
Yeah.
But, I mean, you can read about them, and they are all of differing levels. So you can read like Elsa Bay here, listed as a new distillery. So commissioned in September 2007. That's not that new anymore, really. It's been around for 13 years, but new by the grand scheme of things. And you can go, yeah, I've seen Elsa Bay. I've heard of the brand now. It's part of a big company, part of William Grant and Sons. So that's going to be all right. But then you get through sort of other smaller ones and you go, okay, I've never heard of Ardross and I've never heard of Greenwood Distillers. That was founded in 2019. I hope to see them in future.
Yeah, that's one of the wonderful things. It's a snapshot in time of what the industry has been of the last year or so and a short projection for the year forthcoming. That's one of the really interesting things. That's why I love seeing those books over the time and referring back to them, not just for those articles and essays, but looking at, did some of them make it or did they sadly disappear? And that's the truth of business, unfortunately. But it's also interesting seeing that arc of development. How did they develop? Where did they, maybe they changed direction or, expanded.
I love that Brewdog's in.
Oh yeah, Brewdog.
But that's kind of cool. I mean,
it is cool.
I mean, it's a brewery that now has a distillery, and their distillery would make them the second biggest distillery in Australia if they opened here. But this is massive, and it's like the fact that even breweries are getting into making their own distilleries now. And if I can take a leaf out of one particular Sydney brewery that decided to start distilling, hire a distiller instead of just a brewer, and you'll actually come out with a good product. Anyway, anyway, and then if you flip further on, this is where you get into the closed distilleries, and you start heading into things like, of course, distilleries that are of often mythical status.
If you want to look for whiskey myths, this is probably where they are.
Going back to that comment about whiskey myths, talking about distilleries that often have cult-like status and sometimes undeservedly so, and sometimes deservedly so. Of course, the first one off the rank is Brora, which I think does have a cult-like status for good reason. There was great malt that came out of that distillery. Great whiskies, and
unbelievable.
We've been privileged enough to taste some Broras over the years, and they are something else.
It's odd to me because obviously the distillery is closed, and this sort of goes off on a tangent, but distilleries have closed for economic reasons usually, but Brora made brilliantly consistent, good quality spirit. It was just that they had a second distillery right next to them called Clynelish, And if you want to read as to why Brora and Clonelish existed and what the naming was, because it's confusing, this whole chapter on closed distilleries gives you that insight into why some of these might have some mythical status.
Yeah.
Why are these distilleries so revered and so highly prized by collectors? And part of it is because they're closed, but part of it is, there's a story behind it or a reason. Yeah. Sometimes there's not, but if you want more insight, the closed distilleries section of this book is quite insightful for that.
Some of my favorite closed distilleries are the ones that closed because they had so much misfortune that they're just like, well, that's it, and you sort of read that, it'd say something like 1930 got hit with the plague, 1940 went to war, 1950 the distillery burnt down to the ground. Okay, we're done here. We tried for 30 years to make this happen, never happened. And that's going to happen. My only criticism, he's going back to that question, that great question before about, I think it was Jason Robson's question about what you would, what kind of books should be more written about. You said grain whiskey. I'm going to go with more to books about closed whiskey distilleries.
I have one of mine.
I have one of yours. I have the Campbelltown one.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm talking like a Scottish book. Okay, here's a good example. Black and white blend, a large proportion of the blend in that for a long time was from a distillery called Bankier Distillery. What the hell's Bankier Distillery? Who cares? Yep. But it's like, I'd love to learn the story about these distilleries, and I don't think enough's been written about them.
There is a book on the closed distilleries of Scotland. It's gone to its 4th edition now. It's called Scotch Mist. I've got that.
I have seen that one.
Yeah, I'm sure I've shown Matt at a previous time that I've got a couple of editions, the 3rd and 4th editions of it, and it's someone who's gone and done the heavy research in the archives as to all of these different distilleries, and they had to set a past cut point, basically everything that was legal, because the undocumented distilleries before the Excise Act came into effect in 1859-ish or thereabouts were too hard to trace. There's obviously evidence of illegal distilling going on, bootlegging and so on in years past, but you set a start point and then you go, okay, well, what are the distilleries that came and went before, since that time? Going back to Matt's misfortunate or the unfortunate closed distilleries, Banff is probably my
love
favorite.
Banff, yeah.
This distillery has had a tragic history of numerous fires, explosions, and bombings. The most spectacular incident was when a lone Junkers Ju-88 bombed one of the warehouses in 1941. It was a warehouse. It was a distillery that was bombed by the Germans in World War II.
Yeah. So you can't really. There's not much you can do about that.
You shrug your shoulders and go,
yeah. Okay, that was fun. Yeah. So grabbing some of the questions coming in. Wait, hashtag sick burn. James, I appreciate that. Another question. Which is the nerdiest book you've ever read?
Oh, the nerdiest book. If I restrict it to whiskey books,
yes.
Probably whiskey. It'll be the Production and Manufacture of Plain Spirit by J.A. Nettleton, which is a 1913 distilling text. It's essentially a guidebook for distillers, and it was used right up until the 70s.
It's the kind of book that puts the word dry in spicy and dry for our flavor profiles.
Yeah. It was hard to read even for me, and I'm a whiskey book nerd. So
everyone loves a good story, says Adam Sauters. That's correct, Adam. Tales of Scotch Ghosts. I would buy that. I would buy that too.
Totally.
Yeah. I think Scotch Mist might be the one to look at then in that case. I think I need the new edition of that.
M-I-S-S-E-D, not as an M-I-S-T.
Mist.
As in something it missed.
Muzz says, Joey Santon, what kind of differences in writing styles do you see in bourbon versus Scotch books?
Oh, that is actually a really good one. There is a noticeable difference. A lot of the bourbon books are written by American writers. Their focus is a lot on the history of the town, the stories behind the community and the person and the personalities behind it. There was one done on Jack Daniels, or Jasper Daniels as he was known, biography of him, and it talks about his life and the culture and the society of Kentucky bourbon. A lot of the more recent books on bourbon, though, have focused on bourbon in cocktails and the bourbon in a mixed drink sort of sense. That seems to be a prevalent thing in bourbon writing. That said, there are plenty of books that cover bourbon, but not so much on the heavy production side, and not so much, I guess, on the stories relating to it. There's because bourbon is named so very differently. You have bourbons from multiple brands coming from the one distillery. It's hard to pin it down on story, so you know that okay, this distillery makes this different range of bourbons, and they're all different in their process and their style and so on. But it is a different style of writing. Yes, please.
Pour a dram. Pour a dram.
I think I've talked without a dram. That's
a cardinal sin. Sorry. Yeah, some of the comments coming through, like less mentions of the word y'all, and less mentions of the word whiskey with an E. And
read a book on Irish whiskey, and it's a lot like it.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, there we go. Look, it's true. I mean, I find actually here's another difference. I find that the American whiskey books that discuss American whiskey culture and whatnot focus quite a bit on cocktails.
Yeah,
and you find that like you can read a Scotch whiskey book like this one that will talk all about the sort of the history of these distilleries and the stories and things like that. And it's not a criticism of the American books, but they often spend a good sort of third of the book going, well, here's the most versatile American whiskey cocktails. And that's good fun. That's good fun. So, I mean, and it's like, we've got a bit of things happening with that later next year, actually, which is very exciting. But we're looking at ways to, it's a really interesting way to keep it versatile and keep it fun as well.
Oh, totally. Absolutely. Yeah. There's no criticism. I absolutely enjoy whiskey cocktails. I find that's probably the most notable difference, though. You don't see too many books in Scotch whiskey talking about the combinations and the cocktails that you make. Not too many.
Dave Broom's book of the Scotch whiskey book by Dave Broom, which he did the gin one as well.
Yep, he did the gin one. That's right. Yeah. Where the whole book was basically which Scotch whiskey goes with which cola, which goes to highball, which goes to cocktail, and. Oh, I like that.
Bit of fun. That's a 10, by the way. Oh. A 10 dot something, 10.192. Deep and complex, sweet and earthy. That's an upcoming release, by the way. And that's, if you're in Sydney, you can taste that at Dean's Lounge, which is our new partner bar in Potts Point, 7 Kellett Street. Well worth dropping in, saying hello to the team there. It's the same team that set up Shirt Bar Barangaroo. They've got a second venue now in Kellett Street, Potts Point. Great little cocktail bar, great little late night jaffle and a drink kind of place. It's really worth checking out.
Got to check that out.
Another great question here from Jason. Sorry. What is a book you recommend that isn't about whiskey specifically, but about something to do with production, e.g., coopering, fermentation, malt types, etc.? I had a great book on fermentation, and if I can remember the name on it, no, I'll come back to that.
A book about whiskey, but about something to do with production, coopering, fermentation.
The production aspect of it.
Yeah.
Really nerding out on production.
There are some books that talk about distillation. I think a lot of them tend to be texts in food science. Distillation does get used a lot across a number of ranges of things, gin and vodka distillation and so on. There's probably the heavy books. There are two, I guess. Inga Russell, not Ingvar Rond, Inga Russell did an American sourced book on whiskey production. Again, a focus.
That's Bizarro Worlding by Rond, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's like this alter ego that lives in America somewhere. It's like, oh, yeah, that guy, yeah.
His alter ego.
Yeah, his alter ego, Bizarro Worlding Var. He's just, he's just out there producing production books.
And they have there's a chapter on coopering and on fermentation. A lot of that does tend to get taught in food science and distillation classes and things. When Matt and I were at the Matt was hosting the .1s event here in Sydney a little while back, or
last week.
That
was last week.
It's at the end of the year, right? We've had a year. It's 2020.
Yeah, come on.
So we someone asked about courses, and there was a distiller in the room, and Harriet Watt is one university in Scotland that does a course on brewing and distilling, and a lot of the texts and production things that they do in that course are covered. The texts are quite specific on that. Probably not really for the layman. They're quite academic and quite heavy towards the industrial chemist, but a lot of the books now are delving into that. You've got a book here actually.
This is a good one.
This is one that came out last year by an American writer, Eddie Ludlow. It's called Whiskey: A Tasting Course, and it talks
really
about,
bloody good, actually. Really bloody good book, and that belongs to you, by the way.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, sorry, that's actually his book. He left it here. I've had a good read of it. It's very good, and it's kind of like one of those ones that is a really good way to explore your palate and explore how it's made.
Yeah.
You got to remember something here, something well worth remarking on here for a moment, as we near the end of our stream. Just a whole sort of, you got to remember that most people aren't interested in the whole sort of how it's made and how, like, what's the phrase that Dave Withers over at Archeros once said to me, just in case you don't want to know how the sausage is made, kind of thing. And it's true. There's a lot of process and protocol that goes into making whiskey that doesn't really appeal to most whiskey drinkers. They want to enjoy it. Oh yeah. They want to drink it. They want to put it in a glass. They want to share it with friends. That's fantastic. And I err on the side of that. I'm more about the enjoyment and sharing. Totally. But I mean, delving into the sort of the nitty gritty of production is something that I find interest in, but not so much to become a distiller or something like that. So don't worry, you haven't got rid of me yet. But it's a good one. It's a good question, and it's one of those things that, how to delve into that kind of subject of production is production. Yeah, you sort of start getting into textbooks.
Yeah, it gets into the text and the more technical aspects of it. There have been books that have touched on it, but not as many really for the average reader or the advanced reader. There's sort of a leap into that heavier sort of stuff. There are some books that I'm sure have that. I'm going to dig that up and I'll let Matt know.
Yeah, we can put it in the stream. We can refresh it. Joey comes in and says, I bought a book on an ebook, on American Distillers called Dead Distillers.
I know Amazon. This one.
Funniest part was the rumor on how Jack Daniel himself died, which hold on, it's the safe on the toe, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's one of those urban legends. It probably happened. It probably wasn't as dramatic as...
I'm going to pick a few people's brains on this one. I know Chris will know this.
Yeah.
Middleton will know
Chris Middleton will know this one, but it's for those playing at home, the story is that Jack Daniels dropped a safe.
No, he couldn't remember the combination to his safe when he came in the morning. He kicked the safe in frustration because apparently he had a temper. And I'm sure part of this is mythology. So he kicked the safe. His toe became infected and he had gangrene and he died of blood poisoning. That's the story. Now,
I mean, how much of that is true or not is up for a debate, really. It's like, yeah, sure, I'm sure that happened. I mean, it possibly did. Yeah. But whether he kicked his safe or he had gangrene from something else, it's one of those Jack Daniels legends, I think, of American whiskey.
Oh, it's yeah.
and if you ever want to start a comment section war on Facebook, if you're on a Facebook group talking about whiskey or something, or on Twitter, if you ever want to start a comment war, just say Jack Daniels isn't a bourbon, it's a sour mash, and then just the comment section will go mental.
Great way to just make
what you do is I recommend making that comment then logging off. Yeah, it's really good. The irony of being killed by a safe, says Jesse. Yeah, it's just like, what? Yeah. Look, I really appreciate everyone for tuning in tonight. It's been fantastic. James says, one last comment. No one ever accused him of being an intellectual, I guess. Muzz, it's been great having you on again. It's been a great hour of chat about the Malt Whisky Yearbook and other great literature. Always a pleasure having you on.
Thank you very much.
If you guys want to see more of the Muzz man talking great whiskey literature, having a chat and sharing a dram with me, I'd appreciate. Pop it in the comments on the video on this, whether you're watching on YouTube, Facebook page, Facebook group. We always appreciate it. Please share this around with anyone who wants to learn more about whiskey literature. And of course, if you're not a member of the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, just check out smws.com.au. Really appreciate you. What was I thinking about whole sort of like, why don't we just end up with .au? Yeah. Anyway, sorry. Okay, but yeah, sorry. That's a really bad joke. But I really appreciate you tuning in and being a part of this, being part of the community that is the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. Aussie members, there's some events up on our site, well worth coming in and checking out. Outturn is still some goodies available from Outturn on the site. Our December tasting, which has sold out, of the whiskey and chocolate pairings is coming up on the 4th of December. I'll be still going live most nights that I can. And if I don't have other things on, of course, and really looking forward to everything coming up, of course, and keep an eye on things on your email and on your inbox, and your email and your Facebook and everything like that.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks so much again.
Thanks,
Muzz.
everyone.
And
Slàinte mhath.
and we'll see you all again soon. And thanks.
Thank you.